I'm Gabriel, and this is The Rare Mind. Today we're diving into why doomscrolling hits INFJs and INTJs with such invisible weight, and the 10 rituals that act like armor against it. Stay with me until the end, because I'll show you how the Franklin pivot turns all that noise into chosen meaning. Doomscrolling was not born out of malice but out of fear. The endless feed of bad news became a strange ritual in uncertain times, a way to feel in control by gathering fragments of catastrophe. It is the psyche's way of bracing for the unknown, of saying, if I read more, I will be prepared. Yet what begins as vigilance mutates into compulsion, and vigilance becomes paralysis. For the INFJ and INTJ mind, this spiral digs deeper. Both carry an unusual sensitivity to hidden structures and symbolic meaning. They do not simply see events. They trace consequences, interpret moods, and project trajectories. Each headline is not just data, it is a tremor that reverberates through their inner architecture of patterns. What another dismisses as noise, the rare mind interprets as omen. I have felt how one story can drain my energy for hours, not because of its factual weight but because of the invisible narrative it carries. The soul tires not only from attention but from resonance. To absorb the collective anguish of wars, scandals, and disasters is to bear burdens that were never ours to hold. There is a subtle exhaustion that follows, not the sleepiness of overwork but the hollowness of spiritual depletion. Sometimes it just hurts. This is why doomscrolling is not mere time wasted. For us, it is a leaking of essence. And yet, the rare mind carries a paradoxical gift, awareness. To feel this drain so acutely is itself a form of vision. The very sensitivity that makes us vulnerable also equips us to name the sickness, to stand apart from it. The INFJ and INTJ soul senses what others dismiss, that this compulsion is not a harmless distraction but a ritual of despair, stealing presence and dignity in silence. What appears trivial is in fact spiritual theft. So this is the quiet truth. Doomscrolling is not an idle mistake but an invisible chain. To see it clearly is already the first act of liberation. The discipline that follows will not simply save time. It will preserve the depth of spirit. The words you hear now are not a sermon against technology, but an antidote for erosion. The rare mind was not designed to feed on despair, but to transform it. And what begins as recognition may end as the reclamation of freedom. What is freedom if not the ability to decide where my attention lives? In the aftermath of war, Viktor Frankl declared that the last freedom left to man is the power to choose his response. His words were not philosophical ornament, but born in the crucible of suffering, where external control was absolute, yet inner sovereignty remained possible. This insight cuts directly into the heart of doomscrolling. The feed may offer endless calamity, but it cannot dictate the way we stand before it. To scroll endlessly is to surrender that freedom without knowing it. The screen dictates the rhythm, the mood, the horizon of thought. We imagine ourselves informed, but we are actually shackled by the choices of algorithms. The INFJ, who often lives through empathy, absorbs pain without boundary and confuses saturation with care. The INTJ, who lives by strategy, mistakes accumulation of data for mastery of reality. Both, in their noblest instincts, fall into a trap of self-betrayal. I have seen how my empathy, when left unchecked, dissolves into passivity, a kind of quiet drowning. Yet I have also seen how that same empathy can turn into meaning and energy to serve, to write, to hold another's pain with clarity. The act of choosing makes all the difference. If when I described that silent drain of constantly absorbing collective negativity you thought, that's exactly what exhausts me, tap the like now. That's how. I know this kind of clarity matters to you, and it tells YouTube to put this antidote back in your path the next time the feed tries to pull you under. For the INTJ mind, the same principle takes the form of discipline. Freedom is not a vague sentiment but a sharp boundary. When to read, when to stop, when to convert knowledge into plan. To scroll without end is strategy undone. To decide one's inputs with precision is the essence of mastery. Frankl's vision, then, is not an abstract philosophy but the backbone of our rituals. He teaches us that no suffering, not even the endless storm of bad news, can steal our freedom to respond with intention. Doomscrolling is not destiny. It is a test of sovereignty. The rare mind must not ask, "What is happening out there?" but rather, "What will I do with what enters my soul?" And so the harsh truth emerges. The ultimate cure for doomscrolling is not avoidance but transformation. The freedom to choose is not small. It is the axis of our humanity. Without it, we are prey. With it, even in chaos, we are authors. The flood of information has no natural banks. It will rise until it drowns thought unless one builds levees with discipline. A curated window is such a levee, time carved deliberately for engagement and time fiercely protected from intrusion. When information is framed within boundaries, it becomes tool rather than torrent. For the INFJ, these windows shield the heart from emotional overload. To face the collective anguish of the world in an endless stream is unbearable, but to approach it in chosen intervals restores proportion. One can say, "Now I read, now I feel, and then I return to presence." This simple act prevents empathy from dissolving into despair. I once noticed that reading the news only twice a day gave me more clarity than checking it 20 times. For the INTJ, the same practice sharpens efficiency. A set window forces discernment. Only what is truly relevant or actionable survives. The feed ceases to be a swamp and becomes a reservoir. Focus shifts from endless monitoring to precise insight. By timing their attention, they preserve energy for building rather than reacting. The difference between random chaos and designed attention is vast. Chaos scatters presence. Design crystallizes it. The news itself has not changed, but the posture of the soul has. Here lies the paradox. To see more clearly, we must actually see less and on our own terms. I want to hear from you. Which of these rituals feels like your natural weapon? The curated information windows, the night guard practice, or the micro-creations? Drop your answer in the comments. Your perspective might be the one that sparks another INFJ or INTJ to reclaim their focus. One question becomes a guardrail for this ritual. Does this time serve my spirit or does it drain it? If the answer is unclear, the window has closed. The mind that respects such discipline will not become sterile but alive for freedom. Does not mean consuming everything, it means choosing what deserves entry. In the end, the habit is simple. Schedule your encounters with the world. In those chosen spaces, the rare mind reads not as a slave to the feed, but as a sovereign spirit. Every doorway changes us. To step into a temple, a library, or even a childhood home is to cross a boundary that alters awareness. Yet with our devices, portals of infinite weight, we pass without threshold, as if nothing sacred were at stake. The ritual of symbolic digital thresholds restores that forgotten crossing. A threshold can be small but charged with meaning. For the INFJ, who thrives on symbolism, it may be as gentle as lighting a candle, writing a line in a journal, or whispering an intention before touching the screen. The gesture itself becomes shield and reminder. I am not entering by accident. I enter by choice. For the INTJ, thresholds take on the clarity of strategy. The anchor device used to time blocks work hours planning. Hours, rest hours, so that technology bends to structure instead of unraveling it. I once paused before opening my laptop, resting my hand on its lid until my breathing steadied. That silence turned the act from compulsion to choice. Such pauses, brief yet potent, change the soul's posture. Thresholds do not remove the world's chaos, but they transform our entry into it. They slow the unconscious rush that fuels doom scrolling and create a sense of sacred space even in the digital. Is it not striking that we honor the opening of a door with a knock, yet dive into the endless feed without a single gesture of reverence? The practice is clear. Set a signal, however modest, before engaging your device. Let it be a candle, a timer, a breath, or a phrase. The signal is not decoration, it is consecration. It reminds the rare mind that every entry into digital space is also an entry into the soul's atmosphere. In the end, thresholds teach us what the feed never will, that attention is not cheap. It is sacred currency, and it deserves ceremony before it is spent. There is a moment after heavy news intake when the soul feels swollen, as if carrying the weight of voices that do not belong to it. Silence, then, is not avoidance but medicine. The solitude reset is the deliberate act of stepping back from noise so the nervous system can breathe again. For the INFJ, this withdrawal is a return to inner compassion. Empathy scattered outward regathers like a river returning to its source. In solitude, the heart becomes less porous, less consumed by borrowed pain, and more capable of discernment. I once sat in a darkened room after hours of scrolling and realized my spirit was starving, not from lack of information but from lack of stillness. For the INTJ, solitude sharpens into synthesis. Raw data transforms into structure, chaos becomes diagram, and unfiltered impressions harden into strategy. Time alone is not mere rest. It is alchemy. Without it, information never crystallizes into wisdom. With it, even the heaviest input becomes raw material for purpose. Solitude has long been a laboratory of resilience. Think of monks retreating into cells, writers closing doors, leaders stepping away from crowds before decisions. Silence is not absence but incubation. It is the space where the rare mind reforms itself after contact with overwhelming tides. What noise steals is presence. What silence restores is sovereignty. The practice is simple yet difficult. After consuming heavy news, withdraw even for 10 minutes. Close the screen, dim the lights, step outside, or simply sit with breath. Do not rush to fill the gap. Let the gap heal you. Sometimes, the bravest act is not to keep reading but to stop. Not all information deserves entrance into the soul. The endless stream thrives on shock, sensation, and fear, but meaning is its rarest currency. The meaning filter is the quiet discipline of scanning for depth instead of noise, choosing content that nourishes instead of corrodes. Without it, doom scrolling feeds despair. With it, awareness becomes purposeful. For the INFJ, the filter sharpens into a question of compassion and clarity. Does this deepen my empathy or my understanding of the human story? If not, it belongs to the wasteland of trivial despair. For the INTJ, the filter crystallizes into strategy. Can this be acted upon in my long-term vision? If the answer is no, then attention spent on it is theft. I have asked myself these questions mid-scroll, and suddenly the feed shrank. 80% of it became irrelevant. The practice does not make the world less tragic, but it makes our attention less wasteful. By stripping away the spectacle, we preserve focus for what can actually move us to care or to act. This is not detachment, but refinement. Without such refinement, empathy bleeds into exhaustion, and strategy collapses under noise. In many ways, this filter is the rare mind's weapon against despair. It transforms passive consumption into a search for existential relevance. It treats attention as a sacred offering, not a compulsive reflex. What we choose to let in is what we become. So the question lingers, sharp as a blade. Does this piece of news belong in my soul, or does it belong to oblivion? To live by that filter is to stop doom scrolling not by force, but by elevation. One begins to read not for despair, but for meaning. Doom scrolling feeds the illusion that we are acting while we are, in truth, only absorbing. Creation is the opposite gesture. It reclaims agency by turning energy outward instead of inward. Intentional micro-creations are small acts of building that interrupt the spiral of passive despair and remind the soul of its power. For the INFJ, these moments often take the form of symbolic expression. Writing a short reflection, sketching a fragment of feeling, or crafting a metaphor turns raw emotion into form. What once threatened to overwhelm becomes transfigured, and empathy gains clarity through symbol. I have often found that writing even 2 sentences after reading the news restored more equilibrium than hours of scrolling ever could. For the INTJ, creation emerges as structure. A sudden framework, a project outline, a diagram scribbled in haste, these micro-acts of order anchor the mind and strategy. The feed becomes raw material for construction rather than a swamp of distraction. Instead of drowning in endless input, they weave fragments into architecture. The scale of these creations is deliberately small. A paragraph, a sketch, a note, anything that breaks the cycle of consumption and proves that energy can still move outward. This smallness is not weakness, but strength. It ensures that the act of creation is sustainable, repeatable, and not paralyzed by the demand for perfection. The difference is profound. Scrolling drains, but creating dignifies. Each gesture, however minor, reminds the rare mind that meaning is not found in absorbing the collective storm, but in shaping response to it. So let the rule stand firm. For every descent into the feed, craft something small before you return. In this rhythm, doom gives way to dignity. The night has always carried a double power. It can heal, wrapping the body in rest, or it can haunt, filling the mind with echoes of the day. To guard the night, then, is to guard the subconscious, the soil where tomorrow's thoughts will take root. The night guard practice is a deliberate refusal to invite the chaos of news past a chosen hour. For the INFJ, this boundary is an act of mercy. Dreams are easily invaded by the residue of sorrow and violence, and the sensitive mind does not forget what it has seen. To cut off the feed before sleep is to protect the imagination from contamination, allowing empathy to heal instead of burn. I once woke from a dream filled with headlines, realizing that I had carried the digital storm into my most private sanctuary. Here we don't just rant about bad habits, we rebuild them with precision. From symbolic thresholds before you touch your phone to the solitude reset after heavy news, every week I bring tools to protect the rare mind from mental chaos. If that's the kind of strength you want to cultivate, subscribe and walk this path with me. For the INTJ, the guard is a matter of efficiency. Rest is strategy's foundation, and a restless mind cannot calculate clearly. Doom scrolling before bed corrodes the sharpness needed for tomorrow's plans. By enforcing a cutoff point, the INTJ secures clarity the way a general secures supply lines. The contrast is striking. Restful sleep becomes a seed of resilience, while overstimulated insomnia breeds only weakness. The ritual is not about asceticism but about clarity. When the night is left unguarded, despair seeps in unnoticed. When guarded, it becomes a wellspring of hidden strength. The practice is simple but severe. Set an hour when no news enters. Replace the screen with silence, reading, or gentle ritual. Let the body and mind unclench. The rare mind does not surrender the night to chaos. It consecrates it as the ground of renewal. Because the truth is this: tomorrow's clarity is written in tonight's discipline. No one doomscrolls alone. The feed is woven with voices, groups, and subtle pressures that demand we absorb their anxiety. To resist this, the rare mind requires armor rituals that cut ties with draining currents, restore contact with the body, and consecrate. Silence as sanctuary. Social boundaries are the first defense. For INFJs, whose empathy is magnetic, this means stepping away from groups, chats, or feeds that siphon energy with constant despair. To say no more is not cruelty but fidelity to the soul's limited reserves. For INTJs, boundaries are strategic filters, pruning information streams so that only sources that strengthen long-term vision remain. I once unfollowed a news source I checked daily, and the relief felt like fresh air in the mic in the lungs. Embodied grounding is the second layer. The endless scroll severs us from physicality, but a walk in the evening air, The touch of bark against the palm or the rhythm of deep breathing anchors us back into the present body. Sometimes, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes was enough to pull me back from mental drowning. The body remembers what the screen makes us forget, that we are alive here, not trapped in abstraction. Selective silence is the final shield. Silence is often mistaken for withdrawal, but here it is sanctuary. The rare mind retreats into quiet not to escape the world, but to reclaim the capacity to meet it with presence. A room without voices, a pause in conversation, even minutes of phone-free stillness form a shield against the erosion of constant input. Together, these three rituals interlock like armor. They are not escapes but defenses, not indulgences but necessities. Doom-scrolling thrives in porous souls and unguarded attention. Armor makes presence possible, and so the practice stands. Set boundaries, touch the earth, consecrate silence. In a world of noise, these gestures are not luxuries, they are survival. At the core of every ritual is a choice, and at the core of every choice is meaning. Viktor Frankl taught that life is not about avoiding suffering, but about transforming it. Doom-scrolling is the very opposite of that transformation. It is surrender to raw pain without giving it form. The Franklian pivot is the rare mind's final answer, to bend despair into destiny. For the INFJ, this pivot means transmuting sorrow into contribution. Empathy no longer drowns but becomes fuel for compassion lived out in word, gesture, or presence. What once was passive ache turns into active care. I have felt this shift when instead of absorbing pain endlessly, I wrote words that gave another strength, and in that act my own heaviness lightened. For the INTJ, the pivot becomes a forge of purpose. Suffering is not wasted but converted into structure. A plan, a project, a mission that channels chaos into order. The same mind that once spiraled through feeds now sharpens itself into strategy, shaping the future instead of consuming its fragments. The ultimate anti-doomscroll is not escape but creation. To live chosen meaning is to refuse to spare its throne. Doomscrolling consumes destiny. The Franklian pivot creates it. The rare mind discovers that the feed is not the horizon of life but raw clay awaiting form. So the vision expands. We are not condemned to endless scrolling, to absorption without action. We can choose thresholds, solitude, filters, creations, boundaries, and finally, transformation. We can decide that our nights, our mornings, our souls are not marketplaces for despair, but sanctuaries for meaning. This is the harsh truth, but also the liberating one. Feeds will always overflow with chaos, but the rare mind is not built to be a vessel of despair. It is built to turn darkness into form and form into destiny.